Is Broadcom at $222 a 3x opportunity? That's what I'm going to cover in this video. I'm going to do it in two parts. In part 1, I'm going to cover the growth story, and in part 2, I'm going to cover the valuation. So if you're only interested in the valuation, you can move on to part 2 of this video. If not, you can continue with part 1. Let's get started with the growth story. Broadcom has two revenue segments broadly. One is semiconductor solutions, the other one is infrastructure software. Semiconductor represents about 60% of their revenue and infrastructure software about 40%. Within semiconductor solutions, they have networking, server storage, broadband, wireless, and industrial. Before 2023, Broadcom was growing its revenue in single digit percentages on an average, and they have decided to acquire a company called VMware, which was also growing in single digit percentage. And they did this transaction for about $69 billion. It's done with both cash and stock. This has resulted in significantly high growth in Q1 through Q4 of 2024, as you can see on the screen. So even though you see very high revenue growth, it's not organic. It's because VMware's revenue of $3.5 billion per quarter on an average being added to Broadcom. But if you actually look into their organic growth rate, that's single digits. That's evident from their most recent quarter results. They are saying even though they have grown their revenue by 47% year over year, the organic growth is only 4%. So the message here is they are still growing in single digits organically. This VMware acquisition has done two things. One is damage to their balance sheet. As you can see on the screen, they had $37 billion of debt until Q4 of 2023, and by Q4 of 2024 the debt is close to $67 billion. That's significant debt. And the second thing that it did was significant dilution. They had 4.2 billion outstanding shares by Q4 of 2023, and by Q4 of 2024 they had 4.77 billion outstanding shares. That's significant dilution. But one thing that's going in Broadcom's favor is their margin profile. As you can see on the screen, they continue to maintain 75% gross margins, which are phenomenal for a hardware plus software company like Broadcom. And when you look into their operating margin, it was 45% plus until 2023. After VMware's acquisition, it reduced from 45% plus to 30 to 39%. And the net profit margin is wavering between 11 and 29%, and that's probably due to the interest rates that they have to pay on that high debt. And the free cash flow margin also reduced since the acquisition. It's wavering between 37 and 47%. Overall, we had a boring company which was growing in low single digit percentage but had high margin, but they had not much going on for them. Enter their CEO Hock Tan, and he changed everything. He said this. He said that there's a revenue opportunity ahead for Broadcom's AI and AI networking, and he's forecasting an opportunity between $60 billion to $90 billion by 2027. And he's saying that Broadcom will get this revenue from about 3 customers. He's naming them as customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, but actually they are Google, Meta, and ByteDance, which is a parent company of TikTok. Majority of this revenue will come from Google, followed by Meta, and a little bit of portion from TikTok. Analysts are saying that they can acquire about 70% of this revenue. They can capture 70% of this revenue. So the upper limit $90 billion, 70% of that is about $63 billion. This year, they were making $12 billion in AI revenue. And from 12 billion, they're saying there's a potential to get to 63 billion in just about 3 years. And that has excited the investors, and the stock has skyrocketed. So where is this additional revenue coming from? It's coming from the networking and then the XPUs. XPU is similar to GPU, but it's significantly cheaper than GPU, and it consumes less electricity than GPU. That's manufactured by NVIDIA. So what's the catch? GPU can do a lot of things, but XPU is targeted at a particular workload. And that's suited for these big companies like Google and Meta, which are focused on one application. So they can buy a lot of these XPUs and run that particular workload. So when we hear about this AI opportunity, The next question that any analyst would be interested in is the margins. Can they get margins like Nvidia? Nvidia, for example, makes 60% operating margin, 60% plus, and net profit margin of 50%, which are phenomenal. They have very high pricing power and they are a monopoly in GPUs. So can Broadcom simulate that? That's the question asked by a gentleman called Vivek Arya. And Hawk 10 said the operating margin will improve from where we are today. So he did not actually answer the question directly. And one thing I want to mention is that this revenue that's going from 12 billion to 63 billion on the upside is coming from both networking and XPUs. So there's also a networking part. There's only hype about the XPUs. So in the valuation, I'm going to consider that everything is coming from XPUs. And that's where I can assign a higher margin. If I include networking, it will not be high margin, right? So we also have to ask a question to ourselves that out of the $63 billion of revenue in 2027, the AI revenue, how much is coming from networking and how much is coming from XPUs? We do know majority of it will be XPUs, but we have to also think about the networking because the margins are not same. Let me finish the story with some metrics. As you can see on the screen, at $222, the market cap is $1 trillion. For the past 12 months, they made close to $51 billion of revenue. This is VMware plus Broadcom. And the net income is $5.9 billion. The PE ratio is 171 and the forward PE is 34.83. And they also pay a dividend of 1%. So that's close to $5 to $6 billion of net income that's going towards the dividend. So you see the EPS is shown as $1.23, but the dividend is 2.36. So there's also that dividend burden in addition to the debt and interest on Broadcom. So this is the growth story. It's more AI driven and they are going to do well in the next few years, but I'm going to show the valuation in part 2 where I can show you the upside. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching.